My name is Arthur Corrigan. I'm 61 years old now, but I was 54 when it happened. For 30 years, I was a Pennsylvania state game warden. I've spent more nights in the woods than most people have spent in their own backyards. I've tracked poachers in the dead of winter, tranquilized black bears in suburban neighborhoods, and investigated more strange animal reports than I can count. I've seen mountain lions where there aren't supposed to be any, dealt with rabid coyotes, and pulled more than one lost hiker out of the Allegheny National Forest. I say all this not to brag, but to establish a fact. I am not a man given to flights of fancy. I know the woods. I know the sounds, the smells, the feeling of the earth under my boots. I know what belongs there, and I know what does not. The cabin belonged to my wife's family. Helen passed 3 years before the incident, and the place had mostly sat empty since. It wasn't much, just a single-story A-frame built by her grandfather back in the 60s, tucked away on a parcel of private land that bordered the national forest proper. It sat at the end of a 3-mile gravel road that was more pothole than road, and in the winter it was completely inaccessible. To me, it had always been a place of peace, of quiet retreat from the world. After Helen was gone, it became a place of memory. I'd go up there a few times a year, mostly with my old partner, Cal Peterson. We'd fish, drink a little too much whiskey, and talk about the old days. It was a ritual. This trip was in late October. The leaves were past their peak, mostly a brown and rust-colored carpet on the forest floor, and there was a crispness in the air that promised the first snow wasn't far off. This time, Cal had asked if he could bring his nephew Brian and Brian's girlfriend Megan. I wasn't thrilled about it.
I liked my quiet, but Cal had been helping Brian get his life together after some trouble, and he thought a weekend away from the city would do him good. I agreed. I figured it would change the dynamic, but maybe a little new blood wouldn't be so bad. They arrived in Brian's Subaru, a car wholly unsuited for the road up to the cabin. It was caked in mud up to the windows by the time they pulled in. Cal got out of the passenger side, grinning. He was built like a retired linebacker, with a thick gray mustache and hands that could palm a basketball. He was as steady a man as I'd ever known. Brian unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was tall and lanky, with the kind of practiced urban coolness that looked out of place against the backdrop of ancient hemlocks. Megan was small, blonde, and looked like she was already regretting her decision.
She was wearing thin leggings and fashion boots, shivering in the autumn air. "Art, you old hermit," Cal boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Smell that air. Better than anything you can get in a can." "It'll do," I said, shaking his hand. I nodded to the younger couple. "Brian, Megan, welcome. Hope the road wasn't too rough on your car." "Nothing a little suspension work can't fix," Brian joked, though his eyes were scanning the silent woods around the cabin with a flicker of unease. "It's, quiet out here." "That's the point," I said, grabbing a couple of their bags. "Let's get you inside. There's a chill coming on." The first evening was exactly what you'd expect. I got the wood stove going, its warmth slowly pushing back the damp cold that had settled into the cabin's bones. Cal and I grilled steaks on the porch while Brian tried, and failed, to get a cell signal. Megan sat huddled by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the taxidermy pheasant on the wall, like it might come back to life. There was the usual talk. Cal told embellished stories about our days on the job. Brian talked about his graphic design work. It was normal. It was the last normal night of my life. The sun went down early, the way it does in the deep woods, and the darkness that fell was absolute. No moon, just a thick blanket of clouds that swallowed the starlight. The only lights were the warm glow from the cabin windows and the hiss of our propane lanterns. We were a tiny island of warmth and sound in a vast, silent ocean of trees.
It was around 9 o'clock when we heard the first sound. It was distant, a heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the sound of an animal walking. It was too slow, too deliberate. It sounded more like someone beating a wet carpet against a tree, but deeper, with more resonance, as if something massive was behind each impact.
Brian stopped mid-sentence. What was that? Cal and I exchanged a look. We both went quiet, listening. The sound came again, from the north, deeper in the forest. Thump, thump, thump. 3 beats, then silence. Woodpecker? Megan offered, her voice small. Not at night, I said, my eyes on the dark window. And not that big. A pileated woodpecker is loud, but that has weight to it. Could be a tree falling, Cal suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. Or some hunter setting up a blind for the morning. We listened for another 10 minutes, but the sound didn't return. Brian, ever the joker, broke the tension. Probably just Bigfoot. Heard he vacations in Pennsylvania. He laughed, but it was a little strained. We all let it go. We rationalized it. It had to be something normal. A falling branch, an echo from a distant logging operation, anything. But a small, cold seed of unease had been planted. For me, a man who knows the forest symphony, it was a note I had never heard before, and it was deeply out of tune. The next morning, the world was drenched in a cold, persistent drizzle. The sky was the color of slate. After a breakfast of coffee and burnt toast, Cal and I decided to take a walk, check the small stream where I'd sometimes seen trout. Brian, to my surprise, asked to come along. Megan opted to stay inside with a book. The 3 of us pulled on our boots and rain gear and headed out. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. We followed a game trail that wound its way down a gentle slope toward the creek. It was quiet, the rain muffling most of the usual forest sounds. About half a mile from the cabin, I saw them first. Vultures. A dozen or more, hunched in the high branches of a dead oak, their ugly heads tucked down against the rain. They weren't circling. They were just waiting. That was wrong. Vultures are not patient. If there's a meal, they're on it. For them to be waiting meant something had scared them off. Something was still nearby. What's got them spooked? Cal murmured, his hand resting instinctively on the holstered revolver he always carried in the woods. Old habits. I didn't answer. I scanned the trees, my senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched prickled the back of my neck. We moved forward cautiously, and then we smelled it. The coppery, cloying scent of blood, sharp even in the damp air. And something else underneath it. A musky, canine odor, but ranker, more powerful than any fox or coyote. We found the source another 50 yards down the trail. It was a white-tailed doe, or what was left of one. It wasn't a predator kill, not like any I had ever seen. A bear would have torn it apart, scattered the entrails. A pack of coyotes would have ripped and worried at the carcass. This was different. The deer was lying in a heap, its neck bent at an impossible angle. But the truly disturbing part was its torso. It had been broken over something, like a man breaking a stick over his knee. The spine was snapped clean in two, the back legs twisted up toward the head. The sheer force required to do that to an animal of that size was something I couldn't comprehend. "My God," Brian whispered, his face pale. "What did that? A bear?" I knelt, my warden instincts taking over. I ignored the smell and the gore and focused on the ground. The rain had washed away some detail, but the tracks were still there, pressed deep into the mud. They were huge, longer than my hand and wide. They were vaguely canine, with a large heel pad and 4 distinct toe impressions. But there were two things horribly, terribly wrong. First, there were claw marks, but they weren't the short, blunt claws of a bear. They were long, slender, almost like talons. Second, the tracks were in a bipedal pattern, one foot in front of the other.
The stride was immense, at least 6 feet between steps. It looked like a giant wolf had decided to walk through the woods on its hind legs. "No bear made these tracks," I said, my voice low. I looked at Cal. His face was a mask of grim confusion. He saw it too. This was outside our experience. "What then?" Cal asked. I stood up, wiping the muddy water from my fingers. I looked around at the silent, dripping trees. The vultures were still in the oak, watching us. They knew. They weren't coming down. Not while we were there. Not while whatever did this might still be around. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but we're going back to the cabin. Now." The walk back was silent. The easy camaraderie of the morning was gone, replaced by a heavy, unspoken tension. Brian kept looking over his shoulder. Even Cal, who had faced down armed men and cornered animals, kept his hand near his weapon. The woods no longer felt peaceful. They felt watchful, hostile.
When we got back to the cabin, the sight of the smoke curling from the chimney was the most welcoming thing I had ever seen. Megan was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. "You guys were gone a while. Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a dead deer," Cal said, trying to sound casual. "Something big got it." He didn't mention the tracks. I didn't either. No sense in scaring her. But Brian couldn't help himself. "The tracks, Cal. Tell her about the tracks. They were insane, like some kind of werewolf movie." Cal shot him a furious look. I just sighed and went inside to put another log on the fire. The seed of unease from the night before was sprouting, growing into a thick vine of genuine dread in my gut. I checked my own rifle, a lever-action .30-30 I always kept at the cabin. I made sure it was loaded. Cal saw me and nodded grimly. He went to his bag and pulled out his 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. 30 years of partnership meant we could have a full conversation with a single glance. And this glance said, "Something is wrong here. Be ready." As dusk began to settle again, the rain stopped, but the thick clouds remained, promising another moonless night. The temperature dropped sharply. I went around and made sure every window was locked, every shutter latched. It was an old habit, but tonight it felt less like a routine and more like a necessary precaution. Megan watched me, her eyes wide with anxiety. Brian was trying to be flippant, making jokes, but his laughter was brittle. The darkness came on fast. We ate dinner in near silence. The easy conversation of the previous night was impossible to replicate. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of leaves in the wind, made us all jump. The outside world had vanished into an impenetrable wall of black. We were alone, completely and utterly alone. The first sound came around 10. It was a scrape. A long, slow, deliberate scrape against the north wall of the cabin, the one that faced the deep woods. It sounded like a thick branch being dragged along the wooden siding. "It's just a tree branch," Megan said, her voice trembling. "There's no wind," I replied, my eyes fixed on the wall. Cal was already on his feet, shotgun in his hands, held at a low ready. The scraping stopped. For a full minute, there was only the sound of our own breathing and the crackle of the fire. Then we heard sniffing. A series of deep, wet,
guttural inhalations right outside the back door. It was loud. So loud it was as if the animal had its snout pressed right against the wood. It was the sound of a predator tasting the air, smelling its prey. I could almost feel the vibrations through the floor. Megan let out a small, choked sob. Brian put his arm around her, his own face ashen. Then came the most terrifying sound yet. The brass doorknob on the back door began to turn.
Slowly, deliberately, back and forth. Jiggle, jiggle, click. Jiggle, jiggle, click. A bear would have clawed at the door, battered it. A raccoon might have fiddled with a knob, but not like this. This was methodical. This was intelligent. It was testing a barrier, looking for a way in. Cal moved silently to stand beside the door, his shotgun aimed at the center of the wood. I stood on the other side, my rifle shouldered. My heart was a cold, hard hammer in my chest. This was no animal, not any animal that belonged in these woods or on this earth. The rattling stopped. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen, listening. I strained my ears, trying to hear footsteps in the leaves, a twig snapping, anything. There was nothing. It was as if whatever was out there could move in complete silence when it wanted to. "It's gone," Brian whispered after 5 minutes had passed. "Don't be so sure," I said. "It's just thinking." And then a shape blotted out the faint starlight in the small kitchen window over the sink. It was massive. It filled the entire frame. A towering, broad-shouldered silhouette. It was there for only a second, a fleeting glimpse of something impossibly large. And then it was gone. It was just a shape, a cutout against the slightly less black sky. But it was enough. It was tall, taller than any man. Before any of us could react to that, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the small gas generator outside abruptly cut off, plunging us into absolute darkness, save for the flickering orange glow of the wood stove. Megan screamed, a raw, piercing shriek of pure terror. "Flashlights!" I barked, my voice cutting through her panic. "Now!" Fumbling in the dark, we clicked on our lights. The beams cut crazily through the blackness, illuminating terrified faces and wide eyes. Cal's beam was steady on the back door. Mine was on the kitchen window. Brian was trying to calm Megan, who was now openly weeping. "It cut the generator," Cal said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. It had been a deliberate act. It had cut the fuel line or pulled the spark plug. It knew what it was doing. It was isolating us. It was taking away our light. It was hunting us. The next hour was a masterclass in psychological warfare. We heard it circling the cabin, a heavy footstep here, a soft scrape there. It was toying with us, letting us know it was still there, on all sides, unseen in the oppressive dark. We stayed in the center of the main room, our backs to each other, our flashlight beams sweeping the windows and doors. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a trap. A flimsy wooden box in the middle of a hostile wilderness. Then came the rock. It hit the side of the house with a deafening crash, like a small explosion. It wasn't thrown, it was hurled. The impact shook the entire structure. A second later, the large window in the main room, the one with the heavy wooden shutters latched on the outside, shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. And in that moment, I saw it. Cal swung his flashlight beam to the broken window, and for a full 2 seconds,
The thing was illuminated. My mind has replayed those 2 seconds 1,000,000 times. It struggles to accept what my eyes saw. It was standing just beyond the porch railing, maybe 20 feet away. It was bipedal, easily 8 feet tall, with a physique that was a grotesque mockery of a man's. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, its torso thick with muscle, but its waist was unnaturally narrow.
Its arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees, ending in large, 5-fingered hands that looked disturbingly human, except for the thick, black claws that tipped each finger. It was covered in coarse, dark fur, the color of wet charcoal. But the head was the stuff of primordial nightmares. It was purely, unmistakably canine. A long muzzle filled with yellow teeth, black lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Its ears were pointed, erect, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And its eyes, they glowed a faint, sickly yellow-green in the flashlight beam, and they were not the simple, reactive eyes of an animal. They were intelligent. They were aware. They were filled with a terrifying, calculating malice. The creature looked at us, framed in the broken window, and I knew with chilling certainty that it was enjoying our fear. The sight broke something in Brian.
His fear curdled into a kind of desperate, foolish rage. "Get away from us!" he screamed, pulling a small semi-automatic pistol from his jacket pocket. I hadn't even known he had it. "Brian, no!" Cal yelled, but it was too late. Brian fired 3 quick shots through the broken window. The pops of the small-caliber pistol were pathetic in the vast darkness. 2 of the shots went wide. 1, I think, hit the creature in the chest. It didn't flinch. It didn't roar. It simply tilted its head as if curious about the small, stinging insect that had just bitten it. Then it lowered its head and let out a sound that vibrated through my bones. It was a roar that started as a deep, guttural growl and rose in pitch to a deafening, hate-filled shriek that was part wolf howl, part human scream. That sound galvanized it into action. It took 1 step and leaped onto the porch with an agility that was terrifying in a creature so large. It didn't bother with the door. It slammed its shoulder into the wall next to the broken window. The old wood groaned, splintered, and then burst inward. Wood, insulation, and drywall exploded into the room. Chaos erupted. Megan's screams were continuous now, a high, thin wire of sound. Cal opened fire with the 12-gauge. The boom of the shotgun was deafening inside the cabin. The first blast of buckshot hit the creature square in the upper arm and shoulder as it forced its way through the hole it had made. It roared in genuine pain this time, a sound of fury and agony, and stumbled back a step. But it wasn't down. It wasn't even slowed. A huge, clawed hand reached through the splintered hole, flailing blindly. It caught Brian across the chest, the claws tearing through his jacket and shirt like paper. He was thrown backward, landing in a heap by the fireplace, a cry of pain ripped from his throat. "Get back!" I yelled, firing the .30-30. I aimed for center mass. The rifle bucked against my shoulder. The creature was hit again, this time in the gut. It staggered, a dark liquid I knew was blood matting its fur. But still, it came on. It seemed to be fueled by pure rage, impervious to wounds that would have dropped a grizzly bear in its tracks. It surged through the wall, bringing a shower of debris with it. It was inside. The room was not big enough for it. It had to stoop, its head nearly touching the ceiling beams. The smell from it was overpowering. A foul mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else. Something acrid and wrong. It saw Cal first, saw the shotgun as the primary threat. It moved with a speed that defied its bulk. Cal tried to pump another round, but the creature swiped at the gun, its claws screeching as they raked down the barrel. The weapon was torn from Cal's grasp and sent clattering into a corner. Before Cal could even reach for his revolver, the thing backhanded him. The sound was a sickening, wet crack.
Cal was lifted off his feet and thrown against the far wall. He slid to the floor and didn't move. It all happened in seconds. My world narrowed to the monster in the room, the terrified sounds of the others, the smell of cordite and blood. I worked the lever on my rifle, chambering another round. I knew I had to make this shot count. I aimed for the head. But it was intelligent. It had seen what the guns could do. As I brought the rifle up, it lunged, not at me, but at Brian, who was scrambling to his feet, his face a mask of terror. It grabbed him by the front of his shirt with one massive hand, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Brian let out a choked gurgle. "No!" Megan shrieked, a sound of pure anguish. The creature held Brian up like a shield, his kicking legs between it and my rifle. It looked directly at me, its yellow eyes burning with triumphant hatred. It knew I couldn't shoot. It knew it had won. Then, with a single brutal motion, it turned and dragged Brian back through the hole in the wall and out into the night. His screams were abruptly cut off. There was a sound of a heavy impact, a wet, snapping noise, and then a dreadful, final silence. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. There was just the ragged hole in the wall, the cold night air pouring in, and the empty space where Brian had been. Megan was on the floor, making a horrible, keening sound. I looked over at Cal. He was unconscious, maybe worse. Blood was trickling from his ear. My training, my 30 years of dealing with crisis, took over. The grief and terror would have to wait. Waiting meant dying. "Megan, we have to go, now." I grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. She was limp, catatonic with shock. "Move!" I half-dragged her toward the front door, the one furthest from the hole in the wall. I spared one last glance for Cal. His chest was rising and falling. He was alive. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't. But I couldn't carry him. The thing was still out there. It had taken Brian. It might come back for the rest of us. The choice was brutal, impossible. Stay and die with Cal, or run and have a chance. A sound from outside made the decision for me, a low growl, but it wasn't the same one. It was from a different direction, and it was answered by another growl from the woods behind the cabin. There wasn't just one. There were more. They had been hurting us. The attack on the cabin was a feint, a way to terrorize and break us. "I'm sorry, Cal," I whispered. I grabbed the spare key to his truck from the hook by the door. I shoved Megan ahead of me, out into the terrifying darkness. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The 50-yard sprint to Cal's pickup truck was the longest journey of my life. Every shadow was a monster. Every rustle of leaves was a clawed footstep. Megan stumbled and fell. I hauled her up, my fingers digging into her arm. "Keep moving. Don't you dare stop." We could hear them now, crashing through the underbrush on either side of us, keeping pace. They weren't attacking. They were flanking us, driving us toward the truck. It was a strategy, a hunt. We reached the truck, gasping for breath. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit it in the lock. The door clicked open. I shoved Megan inside and ran around to the driver's side. I jumped in, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over, the headlights slicing through the darkness, and they illuminated the second one. It was standing directly in front of the truck, blocking our path. It was slightly smaller than the first, leaner, but no less terrifying. It just stood there, watching us, its head cocked. It had been waiting for us. The first one had driven us out of the cabin, and this one was the stop. They had trapped us. I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning the wheel. The tires bit into the gravel, and we shot backward. I cranked the wheel, swinging the truck around, and stomped on the gas. The truck lurched forward, but something was wrong. It was sluggish, pulling hard to one side. A flat tire. I looked in the rearview mirror. The second creature was gone. Then I heard a rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the truck bed. I glanced in the side mirror and saw it. The first one. The big one. It was keeping pace with the truck, running alongside us on two legs with an unnatural, loping gait. Its long arms swung as it ran. It wasn't even breathing hard. It was bleeding from the wounds I'd given it, but it didn't seem to care. It leaped, landing in the bed of the pickup with a crash that made the whole frame shudder. I floored the accelerator, but the flat tire was getting worse, the rim grinding against the road. The truck was swerving wildly. The creature's head appeared outside my window. Its face was inches from mine, separated only by a thin pane of glass. I could see the detail in its fur, the flecks of blood on its muzzle, the terrifying depth in its yellow eyes. It opened its mouth and roared, spraying saliva and blood against the window. Then its clawed hand smashed through the side window, showering me with glass. I felt a searing pain in my shoulder as its claws tore into me. I swerved instinctively, and the truck, already unstable, careened off the gravel road. We hit a ditch. The world spun, a violent kaleidoscope of headlights, darkness, and the horrifying face of the monster. The truck rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side with a final, groaning crash of metal. I was hanging sideways, held in place by my seatbelt. My head was bleeding, my shoulder was on fire. Megan was groaning beside me. The engine was dead, the headlights were out. We were in darkness again. I heard it moving outside, the scrape of its claws on the truck's metal roof. It was trying to get to us. I fumbled for the door handle, but it was jammed. We were trapped in a metal coffin. Then, a sound cut through the night. A single booming gunshot. A shotgun. It was Cal. I looked through the shattered windshield and saw him. He was staggering at the edge of the woods, 100 feet away. He was silhouetted against the faint light from the cabin. He had his shotgun, and he was reloading. He had woken up. He had come after us. The creature on top of our truck screeched in fury and leaped off, turning its attention to the new threat. The second creature emerged from the woods to stand beside it. Cal was facing both of them. He raised the shotgun and fired again. One of the creatures grunted, but they kept advancing on him, slow, deliberate, like executioners. "Cal, run!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. He didn't run. He stood his ground. He pumped the shotgun, but it was empty. He threw the useless weapon aside and drew his revolver. He was buying us time. He was making his last stand. I turned to Megan. I found the emergency release on her seatbelt, and then my own. We fell onto the passenger side door. I kicked at the already cracked windshield with my good leg. It took 3 kicks before it broke away. Go now! I shoved her through the opening. Outside, I could hear Cal firing his revolver. Pop, pop, pop. Then a terrible, choked-off scream. Then silence. I scrambled out after Megan. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I grabbed her hand and we ran. We ran blindly into the dark forest, away from the road, away from the cabin. away from the sounds of my friend being torn apart. We crashed through undergrowth, branches whipping our faces. We fell, we got up, we kept running. I don't know for how long. An hour? A lifetime? We just ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We collapsed at the base of a rock outcropping, hidden in a thicket of rhododendron, and we waited for the dawn, shivering, bleeding, and broken. We didn't hear them again. I don't know if they lost our trail or if they were satisfied with the carnage they had wrought. When the first gray light of morning filtered through the trees, we started walking again. We walked for hours, moving east toward where I knew the main highway was. Sometime around noon, we stumbled out of the woods and onto the hard blacktop of civilization. The first car that came along was a logging truck. The driver's eyes went wide when he saw us. We must have been a horrific sight, covered in mud and blood, our clothes torn to shreds. He called the state police. I told them everything. I gave my statement to a young, skeptical state trooper, and then again to a county sheriff who looked at me like I was insane. I told them about the sounds, the tracks, the creature in the window, the attack. I told them about Brian and Cal. They sent a team up to the cabin. Of course, they found the wreckage. They found the truck. They found the cabin torn apart. They found blood, a lot of it. They found Cal's shotgun and my rifle. They found no bodies. Brian and Cal were officially listed as missing. The official report was issued a week later. A large, unusually aggressive black bear had entered the cabin. In the ensuing panic, Brian and Cal had fled into the woods and likely succumbed to the elements. My injuries, the destruction of the truck, the hole in the cabin wall, all attributed to the bear. My story about an 8-foot-tall bipedal wolf creature was noted in the file as a symptom of trauma-induced delusion. The claw marks on the truck were inconclusive. The massive tracks I'd shown them pictures of from my phone were dismissed as distortions in the mud. Case closed. They made me see a department-assigned psychiatrist. I was officially retired on psychological disability. They took my badge and my pension. In their eyes, I was just another old man who had cracked under pressure. Only one person ever gave me any validation. A young deputy, as he was escorting me out of the sheriff's station, leaned in close. He spoke so quietly I could barely hear him. "Mr. Corrigan," he said, "I don't know what you saw up there, but my grandfather was a sheriff in this county 50 years ago. There are stories. People who go into that part of the forest and don't come out. He used to say there are things in the deep woods that God left unfinished. You should stay away from there. Don't ever go back." I never did. I sold the cabin for a pittance to a logging company that clear-cut the land. Maybe they bulldozed the memory of that place into the dirt. I hope so. I moved to the city, as far from the deep woods as I could get. I live in a small apartment on the 4th floor. At night, I can hear the sirens and the traffic, and I find it comforting. It's the sound of humanity. It's the sound that keeps the silence at bay. But I still have nightmares. I see yellow eyes in the dark. I hear that scream that is not quite animal and not quite human. I feel the guilt over Cal. I see him standing his ground, buying me time with his life. He was a better man than me. He and Brian deserved more than to be a paragraph in a file about a bear attack. They deserve to be believed. That's why I'm telling this story. Not for sympathy, not to be famous. I'm telling it because people need to know. The world is not as safe and orderly as you think it is. We live on a well-lit stage, and we fool ourselves into believing it's the whole world. But beyond the lights, in the vast, deep darkness, Other things are waiting. Things that have been there all along, watching from the trees. So if you ever find yourself in the deep woods and you hear a sound you don't recognize, or you see a track that doesn't belong, don't be a fool.
Don't try to rationalize it. Turn around and walk away. Get in your car and drive. And don't ever go back. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some places, once you leave, you can never truly escape from.